it is, if you read those judgments, it tells you that actually it is very hard to define what is religion. So they even get into what is religion itself, and very hard to define what is religion, and even harder to define what is Hinduism, because they say that there's so many moving parts.
They actually say that it is hard to define Hinduism.
They don't use the phrase hard to define, but if you sort of read through it, they actually say, some of them go to say that it's an umbrella of various religions or various religious traditions. So there is that recognition which today we have forgotten.
Okay.
So come the 2020s, all that is forgotten, all that wisdom is forgotten, but that wisdom actually exists, because we've also moved civilizationally in our philosophical thought process in a particular way, and as a result, effort is not there. So we sort of look at somebody's description of what those court rulings did, which is a 2-liner or a 3-liner, which is probably the conclusions. Now what, despite doing all of that debate, the question is, why are we where we are when it comes to how a state must engage with religion? And I would say largely driven by, you look at what is our constitution, you look at a lot of our constitutional values and principles. Many of them are derived from other common law systems. So from around the world, whether it is the English system, the US, the Australian, the Canadian. So a lot of our interpretations, constitutional interpretations, lean on those interpretations from those. For example, I mean, I'll take in a non-religious context, I'll say, let's say you talk about what is freedom of speech.
Okay.
Or you will say, what is the freedom to life and liberty under 21. So all of these are viewed in the context. It's also true that we have got all these rights from those constitutions. So these are not homegrown. These are, let's take a step back. But how does the Constitution of India come into place? So they are two basic, I would say, legs on which the Constitution stands. One is how the state must run. When I say state, it is government, it is legislature, it is judiciary, and which sort of comes from the old English Government of India Acts that existed before independence. And then in that you put in something called the fundamental rights, which is a new one, which they sort of carved out from, or they evaluated various constitutions at that point in time. You look at the guys who wrote the constitution, all of them are English educated, are barristers. That is how we understand law. That's the context in which you wrote it. That is the formal element to it. There is also the element that's my formal training, but here is my personal experience living in my civilization. So for example, you will have some aspects being woven in there. If you look at the Constitutional Assembly debates, you will find some things of that nature also woven into the fundamental right chapter. But you will say that a lot of the underlying principles come from Western democracies, from whom we have sort of derived our constitutional principles. So you will find that the courts have taken that path where there is a furious debate, state pulling on one side, common citizen pulling on the other side. So how do I interpret a certain right? And that is how constitutional principles have evolved. They have also, so that's now what is also the construct, and which is where I think that there is now room to start moving away from that particular construct. Our legal construct around the world, in most parts of the world, is based on our experience of the material world, which is the Newtonian world. It is the 3-dimensional world. It is that world that you can touch and feel, and world that you can experience in more direct terms, that you can express without anybody being able to challenge that experience. That is our real world. That is how a lot of these principles have existed. When you describe this in scientific terms, you will say that there is the Newtonian world, which is a wall is a wall, a table is a table, a light is light. And then there is the quantum world, which is a wall is both a wall and a wave. Now, how do the two coexist simultaneously? if you look at almost every application in our existing, in the modern world, from your cell phone onwards to everything else, is derived on quantum principles. There is a greater realization today and a greater acceptance that we live in a multidimensional universe that follows certain kinds of quantum physics principles. Quantum physics principles are not very easy to comprehend completely. You will always see that there are elements of it which are left out.
And there are conflicting ones as well. Some people say multiple dimensions, some will say Big Bang, some will say now multiple bangs, infinite number of bangs constantly going on. All this is also moving parts. But I suppose what you're saying is that the real means the world that we see, touch and feel, sense, the Newtonian, reductionist versus, you're talking about versus whatever else.
Versus the real world. Versus the real universe. So there is the reductionist material. This glass exists here. I can see it, you can see it, everybody
But the real universe, as we are now discovering, is actually far more complex and perhaps you're defining as quantum.
This is also a wave.
Yes.
Now, our minds cannot wrap around the concept that it is a wave. Now, our laws, when you talk in terms of human-made laws, function on the basis that this is a glass, this is a particle. It doesn't take into account that this is a wave, but there is also a wave. Yeah. It also doesn't take into account the fact that if this is a wave, then I have to accept the truth that I don't understand it fully. Yeah. Okay. Now, having said so, the question is, as somebody who frames a law, somebody who applies a law or interprets a law, do I have any option to actually think of the glass in any other term other than as a particle? Can I start analyzing it as a wave and then coming out with some other logic around the glass? The answer is a no. So I am, by my very nature, forced into thinking of a glass as a glass and not as a wave. And this holds good for almost everything that we do. Except when we talk in terms of scientific devices, you no longer think in those terms. You start thinking in quantum terms. Your mechanics run in quantum terms. When you talk in terms of theoretical physics, you again get into a realm which says these are possibilities and there is no way the human mind can comprehend everything in the universe. When you hear me say these things, you will hear lots of spiritual religious leaders talk in terms of how the human mind is incapable of comprehending beyond a certain level. It is not just in Hindu tradition, even in the biblical traditions, and they will say that you cannot understand the mind of God. So there is this acceptance that there is a reality in the universe that our minds will not be able to travel to. It is in the Hindu scriptures as well. In the debate between Shankaracharya and Bharati, basically there is a discussion which is Madana Mishra's wife, there is a debate over how beyond this actually none of us can argue. So those concepts exist throughout. The reason why I bring this up in a constitutional context is we are looking to discuss the right of religion. And religion, I would say, is in this realm. Because all scriptures, regardless of whether they come from the Abrahamic world or the Hindu world or some other world, they all accept this reality that the human mind is incapable of traveling beyond.
And the current laws, systems, design of state theory, judiciary, all institutions, even the doctrine before that, none of this takes into account this variable.
They don't. So they take the easier path, which is a glass is a glass. This is the material world. If I drop this glass, it will only fall down. It cannot go up.
So, very interestingly, a side comment, but I was, I'm not a good reader, but every now and then I come across something nice and then read a few pages at least, and slowly maybe the whole thing. I just started reading Arthashastra, a very good translation. Chanakya writes that all kings and intellectuals, I don't know who he's saying this for, must go through an Veshiki, if I'm right about the term, which have 3 subjects. I'm forgetting the third, but he says Sankhya and Charvak. Charvak is all to do with material things, everything material. And while Sankhya goes into extremely high philosophy of the nature of cosmos and all of that. And so beautiful, right? Chanakya says, because for right governance, you have to go through all of it together. And here we have designed a state which just completely ignores one huge part of our reality and looks at only the physical.
So
Or
if I put it in
perhaps
those
Sharmak.
terms, the way our laws work and the way our state functions is true to the Charvaka way of thinking,
Yes, correct.
which is it is true to the material world. It does not accept the reality of karma. It does not accept the reality or the possibility of karma even. It does not accept the possibility of multiple lifetimes.
Of an Atman, exactly.
Nothing. So it basically says, this is your one life, you need to maximize this one life, and therefore the principles of fairness all operate in these terms. I mean, so all our state is framed in these terms. So that is kind of where we are. If you look at religion, and you will see that the legal debate and even otherwise, the language also, when we talk in terms of English, we use those kinds of languages. So if you talk in terms of, let's say, all Christian driven since we were British ruled, they will say belief. So they will say faith. So the question will be, what is your faith? You will say, my faith is Hindu. Or what is somebody's faith? So somebody will say, my faith is Christianity or Christian. So we term our word for what you do is structured in that term, faith, because for the Christian, faith is the primary character of their religion. And therefore everything is viewed. So when you look at public discourse, this is not only court, you look at public discourse, intellectual discourse, you look at journalists doing interviews on television, everybody use the term faith. Or what is your belief? So again, belief is somebody will ask you, what do you believe in? So let's say that I say that I'm a Sri Vidya Upasaka. So somebody will say, oh, so you believe in Sri Vidya. So the language that we use is belief. And therefore, when you look at constitutional principles and the language used in a lot of judicial precedent, you will find that they are essentially based on the construct that humans believe in the idea of God. You will also see, this is something that we learned from school. Why does God come into existence? So the normal thinking, right from the time when we were in school and continues to be the debate, is humans wanted to look for a father figure. Somebody who was stronger than them.
Yeah, nature was stronger, so you had fear, so you created God.
So you created, as if God was, there was a need to create God and you created God.
Yeah.
That is the construct in which...
That is a scientific construct. There is a biblical construct which is all over us, which is about faith and all of that, and there is a Lord.
So I would say that is not a scientific construct, that is logic being taken to that level. There is no science to it. There's just logically you're saying, all right, this is... I love my father is benevolent, he provides for me.
Newtonian science, if I may say.
Correct. And therefore I need this, so how do I deal with the possibility of thunderbolt falling on me? So then I sort of take it further. So I look for somebody who's bigger than my father, village headman, king, emperor, then go beyond.
Two streams here. One which ridicules your belief systems and hence gives logic such as this, which is your belief in God must be because you are fearful.
Correct.
And the other is that because there is a clock, so there must be a clockmaker. So
correct,
those two constructs.
Correct. Both of those, and you will see that this is essentially coming from people that both why the idea of God exists and the people who believe that God exists, and the normal conversation for even those that you would call God-fearing or believers is somewhere in the back of the mind there is the possibility that the reason why I believe in God is that I started looking for a father figure. Our entire legal interpretation, the way I'll say the way the state is constructed, and I'm not talking about other aspects of how the state was put together, I'm talking about how the state in the context of religion was put together, follows this logic, is that human beings created, there was a need for the existence of God, and you went about creating the idea of God.